different things like that, like things you would never think of, crazy stuff. We said yes a lot to mostly everything and everywhere. I've never done it for that long, and been the lead singer, but I never tried it. I still take lessons.
For nearly 4 decades, Richie Sambora stood 6 feet from the spotlight, close enough to feel its warmth, far enough to watch someone else claim it. He played the riffs that made stadiums shake. He wrote the melodies that a generation tattooed onto their hearts. He was the emotional backbone of one of the biggest rock bands in history. And for most of those years, he said nothing. He smiled for the cameras, strapped on his guitar, and kept the peace. But Richie Sambora just turned 65, and something about reaching that number, that milestone age where men begin measuring life, not in albums sold, but in truths left unspoken, seems to have loosened something inside him. Because what he's been saying lately, it's not the polished, PR-approved version of the story fans have been fed for decades. It's rawer than that, more personal, more painful. This is the story of a man who helped build a rock empire from the ground up, watched it transform into something he no longer recognized, and finally walked away, not with a dramatic exit, but with a quiet disappearance that broke something between him and his closest friend. This is Richie Sambora finally telling the truth. And once you hear it, you'll never listen to those anthems the same way again. Long before the sold-out arenas, before the MTV rotations and the magazine covers, there were 2 kids from New Jersey with nothing but hunger and guitars. Richie Sambora grew up in Woodbridge, a working-class township where dreams were considered luxury items. Jon Bon Jovi, who the world would come to know as Jon Bon Jovi, came from nearby Sayreville, carrying the same chip on his shoulder and the same fire in his chest. When Sambora officially joined Bon Jovi in 1983, it wasn't just a band completing its lineup. It was a collision of 2 musical personalities that, together, created something neither could have produced alone. Jon had the voice, that soaring, radio-ready instrument built for anthems. Richie had the soul, a bluesy, instinctive guitar style rooted in emotion rather than technical showmanship. Where Jon projected confidence and swagger, Richie brought depth and warmth. Their chemistry wasn't manufactured. It was real, and audiences felt every bit of it. The early years were genuinely brotherly. They shared vans, shared stages, shared ambitions, playing clubs across New Jersey and slowly crawling their way up from dive bars to theaters to arenas. They developed a kind of bond that only forms when 2 people are grinding side by side toward the same impossible dream. Those who were around them in those years consistently describe a genuine friendship. 2 men who pushed each other creatively, who laughed easily, who trusted completely. And musically, what they built together was extraordinary. Albums like Slippery When Wet and New Jersey didn't just produce hit singles. They became cultural touchstones. Livin' on a Prayer, Wanted Dead or Alive, Bad Medicine, I'll Be There For You. These weren't just songs. They were generational anthems. And if you listen closely to any of them, you hear 2 voices in conversation, Jon's vocal melody up front, and Richie's guitar answering back from just behind, adding layers of feeling that the words alone couldn't carry. What most casual fans never fully appreciated was the degree to which Sambora was an architect of that sound. His talkbox solo on Livin' on a Prayer became one of the most iconic moments in rock history. His harmonic instincts shaped the emotional texture of songs that seemed simple on the surface, but were quietly sophisticated underneath. He wasn't just a guitarist playing parts. He was a co-author of a band's musical identity. But fame does something to structures. It clarifies them. And as Bon Jovi grew from a New Jersey band into a global phenomenon, a hierarchy quietly solidified, one that had never been formally discussed but became impossible to ignore. Jon Bon Jovi became the face of the brand. His name was, literally, the name on the marquee. His image fronted the album covers. His interviews shaped the narrative. That part was always inevitable. That's simply how the rock industry works. Frontmen get the spotlight, but what began as a natural consequence of fame gradually evolved into something more, a systematic repositioning of everyone else in the band as supporting cast. Sambora, for his part, didn't immediately protest. He was loyal to a fault, committed to the music, and, by his own later admission, inclined to keep the peace rather than demand recognition. But internally, the shift was being registered. Co-writing credits, creative input, decisions about the band's direction. Over time, these conversations seemed to flow through fewer and fewer voices. And increasingly, the voice that mattered most was the one with his name on the building. What makes this story particularly painful isn't anger or betrayal in any dramatic sense. It's something quieter and more corrosive. The slow erosion of a person's sense of worth within a space they helped create. Sambora has described the experience of sitting in rehearsals and studio sessions where his ideas were heard but not absorbed, of offering perspectives that were acknowledged and then quietly set aside, of watching decisions get made and feeling like his presence at the table was more ceremonial than functional. He kept showing up. He kept playing. He kept delivering, night after night, one of the most distinctive guitar performances in mainstream rock. But the emotional distance between what was visible on stage and what was felt behind closed doors was growing wider with every year. Compounding the professional friction was a series of deeply personal struggles that Sambora faced largely without the support structure he might have hoped for from his bandmates. His marriage to actress Heather Locklear, which had been one of Hollywood and rock's most high-profile unions, ended in divorce. The emotional fallout was significant. He was a father to a young daughter, Ava, and the dissolution of his family unit hit him in ways that fame and success provided no insulation against. On top of that, he was navigating well-documented struggles with addiction, a battle that is always complex and consuming, but especially so when you're expected to perform at the highest level every single night in front of tens of thousands of people. What Sambora has revealed in recent interviews is that during this period, when he was arguably most vulnerable, the environment within the band offered little in the way of genuine compassion. The machine had to keep moving. Chores were scheduled. Records had to be made. Obligations had to be met. The business of Bon Jovi had become, in his words, just that, a business. And businesses aren't built to accommodate human fragility. He didn't feel abandoned in any single dramatic moment. It was more subtle than that. It was the accumulation of small signals, the unreturned emotional investment, the sense that his struggles were an inconvenience rather than a concern, the growing feeling that the brotherhood he believed in for 2 decades had somewhere along the way become transactional. He was present physically but increasingly invisible in every way that actually mattered. In April of 2013, Richie Sambora did not show up to a Bon Jovi concert in Calgary. The official statement said personal reasons. No timeline, no elaboration, no goodbye. What followed was one of the strangest and most quietly devastating chapters in rock history. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. No public argument, no tearful press conference, no statement of resignation. Sambora simply wasn't there one night. And then he wasn't there the next night, and eventually the band moved on, replaced him with guitarist Phil X, and continued touring as though 30 years of shared history could be cleanly stepped around. The part that cut deepest, according to Sambora himself, was not the departure. It was the silence that followed it. He has spoken candidly about finding out through the internet that a replacement had been hired, not through a phone call from Jon, not through any conversation with management, through the same channels available to any fan with a smartphone. After 3 decades of building something together, after co-writing the songs, after sharing the stages, after being each other's closest creative partners, there was no conversation, just absence filling in where words should have been. It was like I disappeared, Sambora said, and nobody even called. That sentence carries the weight of everything. It isn't rage. It isn't a call for sympathy. It's just a man describing, with devastating simplicity, what it felt like to become invisible to people who had once been his family. Stepping back from the narrative of professional grievance, it's important to understand the other dimension of Sambora's 2013 departure, the one he considers, even today, the most important part of the story. His daughter Ava was entering her teenage years. She was navigating the particular complexity of growing up with famous parents who had publicly separated, and her father was gone, not metaphorically, but literally, on the other side of the planet for months at a time, night after night, city after city, arena after arena. The relentless machinery of a global rock tour doesn't pause for a daughter who needs her father present. Sambora has been remarkably consistent on this point across multiple interviews. Whatever the professional grievances were, whatever the emotional injuries sustained within the band, the most important factor in his decision to step away was Ava. He did not want to look back at her teenage years and discover he had been a ghost. He did not want fame to be the reason he missed her growing up. "I can play guitar forever," he has said, "but I only get one chance to be her dad." That clarity, that willingness to place a relationship above a legacy, speaks to a kind of maturity that fame doesn't often produce in people. Rock and roll culture glorifies sacrifice at the altar of the music. Sambora, at 65, seems genuinely at peace with having chosen differently. By most accounts, his relationship with Ava is close, warm, and deeply meaningful to him. Whatever he lost by leaving, he appears to have gained something he values far more. In 2024, Richie Sambora did something that very few rock stars of his generation have done publicly. He apologized. Not defensively, not with qualifications designed to shift blame. He simply acknowledged that he had handled his exit badly, that he had left people, fans, bandmates, collaborators, without explanation or closure, and that he was sorry for it. Speaking openly to multiple outlets, he said, "I just disappeared, man. I ghosted." He expressed direct regret toward Jon Bon Jovi, acknowledging that whatever the internal tensions had been, they had deserved a real conversation, not a silent fade. What made this apology resonate so powerfully was its lack of performance. There was no press tour, no album to promote, no obvious strategic motivation. He was simply a 65-year-old man, deciding that the truth was worth more than the carefully maintained silence of the previous decade. He spoke about therapy, about the work he had done to understand his own role and how things deteriorated, about the difference between being wronged and being blameless. He acknowledged feeling creatively sidelined and emotionally unheard, but he also acknowledged that he could have communicated that directly instead of simply disappearing. "I should have talked to Jon," he said. "I should have explained it better." That combination of calling out genuine dysfunction while simultaneously owning his own choices is far more honest than the narrative most artists in his position would offer. Jon Bon Jovi, for his part, has remained characteristically measured in his responses. He has not publicly accepted or rejected the apology in dramatic terms. He has spoken about the band's history with evident respect and moved forward without bitterness. Facing his own health battles involving vocal cord damage, Jon has clearly entered a phase of his life defined more by reflection than by performance. At 65, Richie Sambora isn't trying to rewrite history. He isn't positioning himself for a triumphant return or attempting to diminish what Jon Bon Jovi built. What he is doing, quietly, consistently, without spectacle, is telling the truth about what it cost him to be part of something extraordinary. He co-wrote some of the most beloved rock songs of the 20th century. He delivered performances that moved millions of people on every continent. He was, by any honest assessment, as essential to Bon Jovi's greatness as the man whose name adorned every marquee. And for much of that journey, he was undervalued. Not cruelly, perhaps, but consistently enough that it hollowed out the brotherhood he had believed in. He left. He paid the price. He built a quieter life, one built around his daughter, his healing, and music made on his own terms. And now, a decade later, he's saying plainly what he couldn't say then. The story of Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi is not ultimately a story about ego or fame or betrayal. It's a story about two human beings who built something remarkable together, couldn't sustain the relationship that made it possible, and are now each living in the long shadow of what they created. One kept the name, the other kept his peace, and maybe at 65, that's enough. If this story moved you, leave a comment below with your favorite Richie Sambora moment, on stage or off. Subscribe for more honest deep dives into the untold stories behind rock's greatest legacies.